Hi y'all, and welcome back to my channel. And welcome to the less positive, more negative promised half of my 10 palettes from 10 brands. We've already done 10 best from 10 brands. Today we're gonna do, in my opinion, allegedly, the 10 worst from 10 different brands. Because let's be honest, if I had the opportunity to just go in, y'all know I would roast the ever loving shiz out of Morphe, out of TwoFace, out of Urban Decay, out of Colourpop. There is all kinds of nonsense to be had up in that shiz, but we're trying to be fair, we're trying to be even, we're trying to be level fielded. So we're just gonna have 10 from 10 today for y'all. There was a little bit of like some of these I wanted to talk about. I'm like, girl, you have already torn into that shiz so much. Think of something else. So there was a little bit of like, what do we talk about? What do we do? What is the worst? What is the absolute abysmal epitome of awfulness that these brands can offer? And I'm sorry, even if you a company that got a lot of good shiz, that does not mean you ain't gonna release an ever-loving dud. I've had this happen to me from companies that I absolutely love. I'm riding the high and then they just smack me right in the face with some awful shiz. So, come with me. Let's go down the pessimistic, awful palette rabbit hole. And y'all, I will say right now, if I do not look like someone that Henry VIII would have divorced for, am I even trying hard enough? Okay, we're gonna start off with a palette from Too Faced. I figured if we're gonna talk about bad, awful palettes, we might as well just come out of the gate real strong. We are going for first place up in this shiz. This was one of those ones where I was like, you know, I could talk about this one, I could talk about that one, I could talk about that one. I've talked about those two. And I will admit, the first two that came to my mind were the white chocolate bar and the white peach palette. I've already talked massive shiz about those, so I figured we would share the love, share the shiz talking with another palette, and one came to the forefront of my mind. I had actually had the absolute audacity to purchase this for like $10 at Marshall's, and that is the ever so accurately named Too Faced Glitter Bomb palette. The best thing about this palette was the packaging. It had the rainbow letters that had glitter that as you moved it up and down and around, it did all kinds of fun swishy things. If you're into that sort of packaging aesthetic, I would highly recommend going and purchasing the Natasha Denona Love Face palette instead. It does it a lot better, and the quality of the products in that palette is beautiful. This palette was, I feel, an attempt. Too Faced does a lot of these. They're like, we are going to try our darndest hardest to be the cutest, most woke brand ever. I feel like they were trying to be all like, no one's going to imagine that we're going to call this palette a glitter bomb and then they're going to be amazed with the fantastic glitter quality. I feel like that is not what happened with this palette. They gave us a bunch of like glitters and then they were all like, okay, and we're going to give you a matte white and a matte black. And apparently all kinds of glitter aficionados got all up in my business. They're like, well, you need a white base if you want to pop it like that, and you're going to need a black base if you want to pop it like this. I wasn't really feeling it. I wasn't feeling it either that it was advertised that you needed the Too Faced glitter primer. Y'all know when it comes to my products, I like them to do what they're told to do without needing something else to make them do what they should have done in the first place. And I mean, this palette was just, okay, all right, I understand there are a lot of y'all out there that love your glitter, that will die hard glitter freaking cut crease goddesses and gods and theys and thems. But for me, when you're doing a palette and you're calling it glitter bomb and it's this thing where it's just like a rainbow palette with these kind of fitsy whatever glitter, they weren't even, for someone who doesn't even use and really like glitter, they weren't that good. God! You would have gotten such a better result if you'd just go to Midas Cosmetics and get some of their little loosey glitters. They're less expensive, they're an indie brand, you're supporting and doing good. Don't go in. I mean, there's a reason this palette ain't around no more. Like I said, it was just this like self-aware joke of a palette that was like, we're going to create a palette called Glitter Bomb. And then the people in the company actually took Jared seriously and took it to fruition, and then at the end they were like, oh, wait, maybe we shouldn't have done this. Maybe it shouldn't have been a thing. Y'all know I have issues with all glitter palettes, those ones that you see on like Instagram and they're like, they've got like 3 inches of it and they're like, look at how thick and opaque and pigmented this is. I'm like, yeah, because you've got like that much. I just have a thing. I have agita. I know a couple of y'all have told me down below, try this shiz, do this shiz. I'm just not a fan of it, so I could be utterly and totally and completely biased when it comes to this palette, but it was one of those big two-faced wah 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 moments in my opinion. All right, now we're going to talk about a palette from a brand that typically doesn't have a lot of lame stuff. When it comes to their palettes, their consistency and their quality typically tends to be consistent, but dummy me. My auntie hauled this, and then I bought it because I'm dumb. And that is the Melt Cosmetics Millennial Pinx palette. Which on first glance, you're like, all right, we get some pinky rosy tones. We got a gray. We got a black and we got a silver. It was a very interesting color story, but not in like the trendy, eye-catching, everyone's gonna do it, and more in a like a, oh, that's what you're gonna do? Okay, you do you. It wasn't something that stood out as a color story that was really blowing people's minds. It was kind of like a rosy, smoky palette gone wrong. And not only was the color story kind of like, what? I reviewed this palette and the quality was absolutely abysmal. Y'all know I love Melt, I love Gemini, I love 420, I love Rust, I love the that's the palette from them that I hate, and the Impulsive one. But I hate the Millennial Pinx a lot more than the Impulsive one, because I could make the Impulsive one work. The Millennial Pinx one just sucked. And it wasn't even like a slight sort of kind of sucky situation. It was just a travesty on a whole. You had these mattes that were really powdery that didn't want to do what a matte was supposed to do, and then you're like, all right, let me take this shimmer and let me, oh, lovely. 5 specks of glitter. I love that for me. And then they had this really pretty, like, you're like, that's gonna be a bomb diggity shiznit like inner, no, it didn't do nothing. I can't believe that this palette is still being sold on Sephora. I just look at it and I'm like, no, sweetie boo-boo, no. You need to take yourself out. Just let it happen. Just go away. Out of all the palettes I've tried from Melt, I wasn't super obsessed with the Amor Eterno collection, but after using that and finessing with it, I can use it. This is just one that literally it just sits there, and I hate it. And I haven't heard anyone say they love it. If it's your end-all be-all absolutely amazing pinky rosy smoky eye, that is amazing. You keep doing you, boo-boo. But for me, I feel like all the palettes Melt has ever released, like you could look at all the palettes they'd ever done, from their stacks to their flat ones. This one was just the one that was just awful. It was just bad. All right, let's trash on Colourpop. This is a company that releases a lot, so it probably could have a lot of entries on this, but we're just doing one for one. And I didn't want to talk about a palette that I'd just seen and I was like, yeah, that palette really sucks. I wanted to talk about something I had used. It's actually a trio of palettes, and that is the Cloud Dye collection. It was this very like fanciful, festival, spiritual, ethereal pastel collection. It was in the form of their monochromatic palettes. I was all down for that shiz. And I don't know what it is about Colourpop and their pastels, but they can't quite seem to get a hang on that shiz. You look at these color stories, and yeah, they skew reminiscent to like the Meant to Be, and the Just My Luck, and the Ooh La La, and the Lilac You a Lot, and the Blue Moon. You know, they were very similar, but I felt like they would have been good, soft, sort of companion palettes. You know, enhance what I already I mean, they weren't enhancing anything. There were a couple shades that were pretty that I was like, yeah, this is nice. Probably gonna depot this shiz and put it in a Z palette and put the rest in the garbage where it deserves to be. They just weren't up to any sort of Colourpop standard of quality I'd become accustomed to. Now that being said, I'm not out here buying every other Colourpop palette that they release, and they release a lot, so I cannot tell you what the overall consistency, the quality consistency is. With as much as they release, I would expect it to probably maybe be a little bit shoddy. I don't know. Maybe one of y'all could tell me down below. But these were just so sad. Like, I looked at them and I was like, those are so pretty. Those are going to be so much fun. I love the color. The matte to shimmer ratio was really good on a lot of them. I was just really ready to have these be my next monochromatic, colorful Colourpop palette loves. And they weren't. They were just really pitiful pastel messes. Like, it was basically, you would have gotten better results if you had went to the dollar store, got you some sidewalk chalk, scraped off of that, and used that as eyeshadow. That would have been better than buying these palettes and putting them on your lids. And a little bit of shimmer and a little bit of pressed glitter wasn't going to override the gnarliness and the inconsistency of those mattes. It was just not gonna happen. And that was really disappointing, because like I said, it was in the format. I was so ready. The aesthetic was there. The colors were there. And it did not happen. Was not a good thing. Out of the Colourpop palettes that I've tried, definitely the worst in my opinion. It was just so underwhelming. Wasn't even funny. Very disappointed. Let's talk about another recent one. Again, from a company whose consistent quality I had come to expect. I will leave, I don't think I even reviewed this shiz. I think I just tried it on camera and y'all would have seen how that went. But Colored Raine were like, you know what the people want? We were like, yeah. Colored Raine was like, we're gonna give these people another beautiful pressed pigment, colorful shebang bang palette, and I was so here for that shiz. I was like, this is gonna be it. This is gonna be it. The matte to shimmer ratio, gimme. The Juicy Boost palette, which had a lot of gorgeous section of greens, section of it was just so beautiful looking, and I tried that shiz, and like I said, y'all would have seen. If you want to see, I will leave it down below. It was just a absolutely subpar experience. I have used and am used to the Colored Raine Vivid Pigments palette, which I am aware, I've had people tell me before, well, it's a kind of pigment, and you have to use pigments differently than you have to use. I know. Thank you for your kind advice, but I am familiar with the Colored Raine pigment formula. And I'm not entirely sure what they did to this shiz, but it was not the experience that I was expecting or I was used to from using the Vivid Pigments palette, which at one point was in my top 10 favorite palettes. I may not be Botticelli, I may not be Wayne Goss, I may not be Patrick Ta, but I at least know how to use makeup for my face. And that eyeshadow palette was not having it. The shimmers were just so chunky and hard pressed, and they got everywhere, and the mattes were like, what? I shall not do definition. I shall do nothing. I shall be the bane of your color-loving existence. It was so sad because so many of the colors in that, I was like, this palette with the Vivid Pigments palette, put that shiz together, get me a Yu-Gi-Oh! Fusion going on, and we were going to rule the world. And that is not what happened. That is not the experience I got, and it made me very, very, I mean, you would see, I was like, I'm going to tear my face off, and I'm going to start all over again from cell regrowth. It was that frustrating, and I usually try not to get that frustrating. I was like, I just want to shut this camera off and never turn it back on again, but I was like, y'all need to see the bad as well as the good. It's It's not all roses, sunshines, and daisies. And this was definitely not that. I was just so miffed. And apparently it wasn't just me, which does make me feel a little bit better, but I still wished it would have worked and not been on this list. Okay, let's talk about a palette that I've definitely crapped on. I was going to talk about another one from this brand, but I was like, you know, that one is actually better than this one. So we're going to talk about, again, the Natasha Denona Tropic palette. This palette for me was my first Natasha. She was all everyone had the Sunset palette and the Lila palette and all the $129 palettes. And I was like, I need in on this. I need in on this. And this was the Tropic palette. Had some nice bright color, blue, green, purple, all that shiz up in there that I would like to have. $129, and I was like, I don't think so. And then it went on sale for $65. And they got me, y'all. I bought that shiz. Brought it home with the intention of reviewing it, and it ended up being a palette roast because I was going to talk about the newer Natasha Denona Trio Chrome palette today. But that palette at least has passable mattes and 3 very bomb diggity shiznit shimmers. Take me back to the Tropic palette. I mean, if the Trio Chrome mattes were not a $129 experience, the Tropic mattes weren't even, I couldn't even have said, if this was one of her $65 palettes, yeah, but no. Those mattes were just like, they weren't even like TwoFace and Urban Decay level of quality, which are 2 brands that do not have an eyeshadow formula that I lust after. They were just so average. So ordinary, and for $120, for $65, I expect something that it at least blends somewhat well. And on top of that, those shimmers were so hard pressed. Were such a I'm like, come on, mama need to use you. Because I love mattes. I adore mattes. They're my favorite. I like shimmer, and I like shimmer to do what it's supposed to when it's, these didn't, I don't know what she was on to think that formulating this was worth $129, or she just thought that her bougie makeup artist name made it worth marking it to that price, because none of the eyeshadows in that palette was worth $129, let alone $65. Like, I was going to talk about the Trio Chrome, but I was like, that's not the worst. That is, from what you have tried, that is not the worst. Because the Trio Chrome, I will actually use. If it had been $65, I'd have been like, okay, we'll give it a little bit of a pass. It's pricey, but it's okay. But the Tropic palette was like, just none of it was worth any, like, if it had been like, even like, I mean, I returned that shiz. I hate returning makeup because I know what happens to it. It's awful for the environment. It's wasteful. But I was like, I cannot hold on to a crappy $65 palette. And I thought about it. I was like, I could maybe potentially make some of those. No, just take it. Put it in the bin. That's honestly where it deserved to be. I would just like it to be in the bin with me having my $65 back and not just burning $65. And I'm surprised I ever went in. I don't know if it was peer pressure or what to get me to go into other Natasha Denona palettes, but that one at one point was like that. I am never, ever touching her palettes. I'm never paying a dime. I'm glad to have found ones that I do love. Those $65 ones, beautiful. But any of the $129, I'm just like, I don't know what she's thinking to place that price point on these when she can formulate such really good ones and charge $65. I'm not sure what is going on in that department. All right, we might as well talk a little bit about Jeffree Star. I'm gonna have some people like, yay, trash Jeffree Star. I'm here for it. I'm just being honest. I will trash brands that I love, and I will trash brands that I hate. As you all know, I have consumed the majority of Jeffree Star palettes up till OG. And the one that really stands out to me, and apparently this is a palette that a lot of people love. Like I was talking about, I don't like it. Somebody were like, it's my end-all be-all amazing shiznit palette. But when he did the Thirsty palette, which I feel had whateverness going on for it. It had like the oranges and the blues. It had an aqua. It had the neutrals. The matte to shimmer ratio was good. I could get down. I bought it. I wanted to vibe with it. I reviewed it and I just, color story aside, I could work with those colors. I really could. I pulled that Thirsty palette into a makeup rotation I don't know how many times. But that aside, it was the formula. And I feel like what happened here, and I think people have like said it, is he had done Blood Sugar. And that formula is, in my opinion, still one of the best formulas on the market. Say what you will about him. He knows how to formulate a bomb diggity shiznit formula eyeshadow. And so I was like riding the high off of that. I was like, oh boy, this is going to be smooth. It's going to blend itself. And it did it. It was a struggle to work with. The mattes aren't anything like what I expected. 2 of the shimmers were good. The 3 others were like this flaky, nasty eyeshadow eyeliner eating chimera hybrid situation. Like, I was expecting the sublime elegance and beauty and performance of the Blood Sugar, and that is not what I got. Like, I would say that the eyeshadows he put in the Thirsty palette were actually worse than his Beauty Killer or his Androgyny, which were his first 2 palettes, and you ain't gonna hit that out of the park on run 1. And I know, like I said, so many people love it, and they're like, it's amazing. And I'm like, yeah, the color story the color story I could totally get down with, but just, I feel like compared to all his other palettes and other formulas that he's done, this one was just kind of like the flying dud. I don't think it's available to buy on his site anymore. I think it was one of the ones, I don't know what's limited edition with him and what's not. He's kind of weird out there and whatever, doing his own thing. But just out of all the ones that I'd tried, the one that stood out is just like, you just, of all my expectations that I had for his eyeshadow formula, that was just one big giant flop. Might as well talk about another brand that I held in the absolute highest of esteem for a very long time on my channel. Y'all can probably guess where this is going. Feel free to do so down below. But KVD, who for the longest time was like the brand on my channel. I was like, everything this company does is amazing. I just about reviewed every palette. I had a lot of their products, and this is Kat Von D before it became Kendo Vegan Swift Death Beauty. And I was going along and I was doing my thing, and then they decided that they were gonna hit me with the whammy of the Fetish Collection. For any of y'all who know me pre-Fetish Collection, you will be aware of the fact that my roast of that collection and my fall of Kat Von D analyzation video is got me to where I am right now. I can't tell you how many of y'all were like, I came for the roast, I stayed for the content. You have a very special place in my heart. But y'all, when you have been ride or die with a brand for such an extended period of time, you have sung the tales of their flawless quality, of their immaculate, consistent quality control when it comes to their holiday releases. You know, KVD's holiday releases since Mi Vida Loca Remix were the holiday releases to have. Sold out, sold online for twice the price on other platforms like Poshmark and Mercari. And then they come out with this. We got the packaging, we got the aesthetic, we got the color story that looked a lot better online. And then when that shiz came into my hot little hands and I was ready to just slap it all over my face, it underwhelmed in honestly absolutely every single category. This was the start of the true end for Kat Von D in her brand. Someone whose eyeshadows were typically a flawless, immaculate presentation had become this sort of afterthought of pasty, nasty, ashy, powdery, dusty, awful shades. Random, crazy, whatever thoughtless color story aside, the quality on these were just so subpar. Y'all know that I am once again someone who doesn't like to return makeup. I returned the eyeshadow palette and the blush palette because they were just so below standard, not just for KVD. Excuse me. Burp Squad, we got a little uppy something today. But for the amount of money that she was charging, which was a fair, pretty penny for these things, you know? Like, you couldn't even, you know, it wasn't even just sad for KVD. It was like sad for charging that kind of price point. It just didn't hold itself up. Definitely the worst thing I had ever tried by her quality-wise. It was like the palette tasted of defeat. Like, it had given up. It brought us presentation. It brought us aesthetic. Got a lot of people butt hurt over the aesthetic. But for those of us within a certain kind of community, there was a little bit of a chuckle here and there. But I hate returning, and it had to go back. It had to go back. Both of the palettes. I was like, not even the Kat Von D aesthetic packaging lover in me could hold on to this, because I got angry when I looked at it. I'm like, I want to use you. I want to use you. I want to use you. And I can't because you suck. It was very sad. The best shades in that were like the blacks and the reds. And we already know that was something that she could formulate. So it wasn't bringing anything we didn't already have. Now we're going to talk about Tarte, a company who I don't think I have any palettes from anymore. Tarte had become one of those, like, you need to have it sort of companies when I was going into makeup, and then kind of as I've reached my self-realization, I've come to learn that they were a company where I was like, I could probably get rid of everything I have by them and not ever buy anything ever again, and that's become the case. Aside from their Shape Tape Concealer, your girl loves that shit. It's what I got on today. But I had a palette by them that I really loved. The Clay Face Shaping Palette, Volume 1. And so when they decided to be like, hey, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna take this shiz and we're gonna make a Volume 2. And I was down for it. I was here. I loved the first one. That was my absolute end-all be-all cosplay contouring face kit. And then you had the second one, which was, I mean, you know how it's like always the case where the first movie's better and then the sequel is kind of iffy? That was definitely the case with this palette. It was just compared to how solid, straightforward, and dynamic the first volume was, this one was just a sad, pathetic attempt at trying to expand on that idea. We got a contouring, bronzering face shade, which we had 3 of in the first palette. We got a powdery, piddly, non-inclusive, pasty, pinky blush. We had a highlighter that was absolute chunk city, like enough chunk city to put to shame that highlighter that was put in the Graveyard Girl Tarte palette, if y'all are old enough to remember that shiz. And then it had just, you know, it lacked depth. It lacked any sort of definition. You had these like soft, subtle ecru shades. You had a couple soft shimmers and a couple slightly defining, you know, shades. It was nowhere near as inclusive, nowhere near as just, it didn't give you nearly as much to work with. It was just like if you had the first one and you'd experienced that and you were like, this is so great. It's so multi-purpose. You use contour for the eyes. You use eyes for contour. It was just this perfect, use anything for absolutely everything. And then it kind of was then transformed to this sad half face palette, half really pasty eyeshadow palette. It was like the worst of everything. I think I gave it a positive review. If I can find that review, I will leave it down below and y'all can roast the shiz out of me for being like, this was good. Because compared to that first palette, it was just, and then they had the nerve to discontinue the first palette, which was really great. That was the Tarte palette that I was like holding on to, that it was like, I really want to keep this, but I do want to keep it. So that one was just, I mean, you know, you have the palette in and of itself, which didn't have a lot to stand on, and then the fact that it was like, oh, we're part 2 and we're desperately trying to be a good sequel, but it's not. No, the people are outside the box office with pitchforks. Not good at all. It was just that one. When I was decluttering, I was like, you gotta go. I don't even like you. I don't even use you. You need to leave. You are a sad excuse of a volume 2 palette. Because it didn't even bring anything. You know, it just didn't. It was just there, and it was sad, and it was tired, and it needed to go home. Then, last but not least, we're going to talk about an OG from my channel. Like, this is an old palette. This was like before I even had a nice setup. This was like sad, pathetic, early 90s love child days. I don't even know if I was 90s love child at that point. Because if any of you are here long enough to remember when I was like Nana Kawaii Death Doll, you get a prize for still being here and for sticking with me through this transformation. But this is another case of a palette. I don't know if I anti-hauled it, but I had no intention of buying it. I was like, I'm not buying this shiz. I don't care about the subject material. The color story I already have. It's from a company that I'm like, about. And then I was literally out with my friends and I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm in Ulta. I guess I'll buy it and review it. And that is the Pure X My Little Pony palette. We have talked about this palette. I have talked mad shiz and we're here to do it again. The palette, at its core, I feel like had its heart in the right place. It was like we got these they had little quads, and each of the little quads coordinated. You know, we had Fluttershy, we had Rainbow Dash, we had Pinkie Pie, we had Rarity. You know, it was trying to do the right thing, and sort of where it tried to do the right thing, color story wise, it just couldn't keep up formula-wise. If you took that palette and compared it to the bright colors in the Raw Beauty Christie palette, your mind would be blown. My mind was blown. Because the ones in the My Little Pony palette were these dry, sad, chalky. I remember trying to use the purple and I'm like, I'm gonna pop this shiz on my lower lash line. It was like, oh, no, you not. It would literally just, I'd have it on my whatever and I would like do that and it would be like, pew! No staying power whatsoever. Like, this was the epitome of low quality kids makeup. Like crazy. My Little Pony movie, whatever aside, the quality of the eyeshadows was just pathetic. That was another palette that I had in my collection that was like, when I looked at it, it made me angry. Like, I was like, I paid my money for you. That was during my phase of where I didn't return makeup. I was like, I will never return makeup again. And now we realize that I don't have the money for that. But I just had it. And I was like, I mean, all I can do is kick myself because I brought myself to that. I told myself, I'm not going to buy it. I don't know diddly about Pure's eyeshadows. I'm not a big My Little Pony new wave generation, the movie. And I bought it anyway. I bought it anyway, and it is a perfect example of why you shouldn't do that. Don't be like me. Because it was just this, it was so sad. It was so sad and frustrating, and you couldn't layer the colors, and they were patchy, and they didn't want to blend. Probably one of the top worst eyeshadow palettes. I would put this shiz up with TwoFace White Chocolate Bar, like that level of awful. Like I said, like you take the Raw Beauty Christie palette and you put it, I mean, there is like worlds. I don't know what Pure decided to do, whatever it is, it has worked because that palette is amazing, and the My Little Pony one was just, it was just so awful. Like I said, anger. There are very few products that I actually look at that elicit such a visceral, angry response. And the KVD Fetish and the Pure My Little Pony ones are two of the worst. All right, y'all. That is 10 of the worst palettes from 10 different brands. Not entirely sure if I can do this again. If I did, it would have to be like other brands repeated, like Colourpop, like TwoFace. You know, we didn't talk about Urban Decay, but I feel like it may start to get a little unoriginal or uninteresting pretty quick. Let me know down below if you want me to purge the depths of my mind and eyeshadow palettes that I've used to try to do this again. Could definitely do the top 10 best from 10 different brands. I may do highlighters, blushes. Let me know down below what you all would like to see. Foundations. Would love to hear what y'all have to say about these palettes because like I say, If I talk about something that you absolutely love, that is fan-tucking-fastic, you keep doing you, boo-boo. Just my opinions, just my experiences. But thank you guys so much for watching. I love you, and as always, keep it real. Mwah!